I was wrong and I'm finally going to admit that Solo Leveling is one of the best anime today.
Oh my.
No!
So guys, how are you? I hope you are well. I am the Monio, the interdimensional demon, who talks most about Solo Leveling on YouTube, and you are on my channel. I'm one of the people who didn't read the manhwa when it came out, and I had high expectations for the anime, due to the hype, but I was disappointed with the first episode, which only delivers a weak premise, a slightly generic world, and characters that in my opinion, they were very uninteresting, and even the protagonist's design I found very simple, and I kept wondering what people saw so special about this anime. In the fourth episode, we finally understand how the narrative will be conducted, as this is a very different case, in which we have a protagonist who is not very charismatic or interesting, but who sustains interest in the way in which the progression of his power happens. In shounens focused on fighting, we always have training arcs, in which the character evolves to become stronger, and manage to overcome the next challenges that are increasingly greater, but in Solo Leveling, the narrative works as a training arc, but all the time, and instead of you having great expectations around a moment, which was the result of great training, instead of the character demonstrating a fighting style, or a totally new power that took him 6 months training to learn, we are rewarded narratively with small moments of gradual evolution, which will probably be understood throughout the entire anime, in a scheme very similar to games, even having menu screens, inventory, and other things that you would have in a game. And I'm not saying that this is the first anime to do this, or that Solo Leveling is reinventing the wheel. This style that incorporates game elements into the narrative, or that emulates the game itself, has already been used a lot, and we have an example recent games like Shangri-La Frontier, which do this very well, but what exactly would Solo Leveling have different to make it stand out so much? The protagonist's first difference is that he lives in a world where the power level of the characters who explore the dungeons, who are called hunters, does not vary. People who are weak cannot get stronger if you receive their power, and it is a ranking, and, as is the case with the protagonist, you will probably die at that same level, and the protagonist is the only one who can evolve and climb the ranking. This is interesting if you think of social classes as an analogy, in which few people manage to achieve social success, because for many this is simply impossible. But I believe that what makes people like Solo Leveling is the fact that the protagonist eventually become absurdly powerful in relation to characters who should be stronger than him, which is something that also happens in One Punch Man. So I decided to start reading the manhwa, and delve deeper into how this narrative will work, so I'm going to mention some things, with as few spoilers as possible. The protagonist will become very strong, absurdly strong as expected, and that's part of what makes people like it so much, an absurdly powerful protagonist, who gets even stronger. This is the perfect anime for you to do the famous power level comparisons, and that's basically half of the shounen fighting anime discussions on the internet, which character beats which character and what their power ranking is, and mainly, which character is the strongest, and the protagonist of Solo Leveling will become the strongest character, to the point that when some relevant ranks appear in the story, the protagonist will already be much more powerful than him. So we can say that it is a story made with a very specific audience in mind. This unbridled scale of power growth eventually becomes a problem for the story in my opinion, as little by little you lose the sense of danger, and consequently the fights lose weight, as there is no real risk, and the fact that the protagonist does not being very charismatic, and not having characteristics that I find so interesting, and this is exactly the type of work that One Punch Man satirizes. And there are several things that narratively I find very strange in Solo Leveling, such as the fact that the secondary characters are not well developed, as the story is not very interested in them. And although we have really cool fights, this makes the problems related to having an invincible protagonist worse. Another thing that I find very strange is that the story is not very judgmental about the character of the protagonist. For example, the protagonist will gain an ability to enslave the souls of the enemies he defeats, and use it in battle. When he does so with monsters, you don't judge, after all they are monsters, but at a certain moment, he will kill another human being, for a trivial reason, and will enslave that guy's soul, and at the time you imagine that this is actually very wrong. Instead of the story judging this, it makes a joke, because the character becomes a joke, and the story uses this to try to create humor, and I just found it a terribly strange narrative decision. And for those of you who watched Hunter x Hunter, know that in Solo Leveling, we will have the Chimera Ant Saga, we will even have a generic Meruem as an enemy, but obviously he is not as good as Hunter x Hunter. Perhaps the most interesting thing in solo leveling are the rules of how the world works, and it's very difficult to talk about this without giving too many spoilers. But when some things are revealed later in the story, we'll discover very interesting things about this world, like how things happen and how it relates to some characters. And this part made me very curious to read more and see what will happen. But what about you? Have you read the solo leveling manhwa? Are you watching the anime? What do you think so far? Leave it in the comments, and if you like the video, subscribe to follow the next content. Until next time my people, demonic hugs.